we are talking about accessibility and tech. And specifically, I think our slant that we took for it was going to be around accessibility in the web, software development. I mean, we can get into other topics and all questions are fair game, but I am joined today by Kim Nguyen. So thank you, Kim, for joining us. I got Annette Lewis, and then I am here from probably mere comic relief on the panel. But each of us went out and picked up a couple articles, couple news items, or a couple tips, or a couple tricks that we wanted to share with you all today as part of our little panel. And now, everyone, again, I want to repeat this one more time, and I'll probably repeat it again. Feel free to unmute, feel free to ask questions, feel free to interject. If you aren't comfortable unmuting, throw it into the Zoom chat. We will find it. If you aren't comfortable with Zoom chat, throw it into the Slack chat. We'll find it. If that's not comfortable for you, find a carrier pigeon, send it my way. I've got my window open. I'll be waiting for those messages to come in. So we will move along with this right now. To kick it off, so for those of you who aren't aware, again, it's Accessibility Month here in May, and I wanted to make sure that the software we build as craftsmen and artisans of software, we are taking care to build software that's accessible to others. So I've been involved with the Plone community since probably, my goodness, 2003, I think is when I first joined the Plone software community. And one of its like things that kind of drew me to it was its attention to detail for accessibility. And I think we'll talk about this as we go through, but I was just kind of giving a quick background about myself. Actually, why don't you, Kim and Annette, we'll just do some quick introductions. So Kim, tell me who you are and why you care about accessibility.
I guess, I'm VP of Engineering at 6 Feet Up. It's been a great pleasure and privilege to work with Calvin and Annette and the crew at 6 Feet Up. I actually met them through the Plone community, through the Plone project, because I worked at a university where we brought Plone to the campus and ended up with about 350 websites, intranets, workflow apps using Plone. And I met Calvin at a Plone conference in DC with maybe a racy story, maybe a little salty story, which
We'll save that for with the beers after the meetup.
I will not recount it here, especially since it's being recorded. But
Awesome.
that's how I met Calvin. And Plone was one of the great things about Plone for a university, as many of you know. Federal institutions, government institutions have to have accessibility compliance as it's a requirement. So Plone was checking off that box from the get-go.
Awesome. All right, Annette, why don't you give a quick introduction and why are you interested in accessibility?
Hello, I'm Annette. Been doing the web since early 2000s, but professionally in 2013. I also worked with the university using Plone, and as a university, compliance is a really, really big deal. And I was a chief compliance officer there, checking through our sites and such. And the more I started to learn about accessibility, I realized it wasn't just boxes we had to check off. It really is enabling and widening the amount of people that can actually interact with what you're building, and being able to reach an audience and make sure that all of them have access to the information just became so important to me that it became a core part of my drive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Penn State had a really interesting story with accessibility, and I don't know if Annette, you're going to tell more about that later, but I just find that their focus on accessibility was like really incredible. I mean, I've met some of the folks who were in
Yeah.
those teams at WebLion there, and it's really interesting that the Penn State they kind of got their hand forced, right? And that, I mean, maybe you can
They
fill
did.
fill a little bit of the story in there.
So without naming names, I'll just keep away from there. Basically, what tends to happen with a lot of big organizations is that every once in a while, someone runs into a severe problem or they see a problem. And if you see something, you say something. And often that comes in the form of a lawsuit. And part of the remediation of that lawsuit will tell you a date you need to get done by, things that you need to do, and standards that you have to meet. And it is a huge encouragement for large organizations, especially, to become compliant.
Yeah, and Penn State's not the only one who's had this happen to them. It's just they seem to make the news. They made the news with that one for sure. All right, I'm going to kick it off. We've got each of us took kind of two stories, two tips, and we're going to alternate down through all those things. Let me switch my share to my specific item.
Can we use this for language translation like Mandarin, Cantonese, French, German, English?
Well, I mean, in which sense are you referring to, like using this?
Accessibility for everybody.
But I
That's
think that would apply.
probably it's probably a good point though, Calvin, to
Yeah.
maybe we can or Annette can also explain what she considers to be the accessibility topic that we're covering today, because translation of video, for example, is that what you mean?
Oh, text content, web pages,
Yeah,
content.
internationalization in
Just
general.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So you write a
Right.
program in one language, and you can read it in Cantonese and understand it.
Mm-hmm. No,
It's
I think that's absolutely applicable. I think as far as accessibility goes, some of the things some of the tools we're going to talk about don't address that, but I think that content needs to be available to folks in their language or into a medium that they can consume, and it absolutely falls under the like kind of umbrella of accessibility.
it's definitely part of being inclusive and welcoming.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Definitely part of being inclusive.
Kim, do you know an automated tool that'll do that for us?
Interesting. You should ask. Yes. Well, I mean, okay, I can talk about Plone, but Plone has multilingual capabilities built into it. It's used around the world, and our European friends regularly create Plone sites with 3 or 4 languages supported. But if you need an automated tool, you can always fall back on a thing from Google. There's a translation widget that essentially you put it on your web page, and a visitor can select from a widget all the different languages that Google is able to translate the content into. And so if you go to a site that has that widget on it, and so we have some clients who've asked for this particular kind of widget, they go to a page that's written in English and they select, say, Spanish, and then Google the JavaScript re-renders that page and replaces all the English text with Spanish equivalent. It can be good quality translation, sometimes maybe less so, but it's better than nothing.
All right, I'm going to do a play action call because this is actually my second topic I was going to cover. So I want to cover it first because it's actually applicable to what we're talking about here, which is more than just like language translation, but things like captioning. I put this article into our kind of lineup because I thought it was important. At first, when Zoom had automatic closed captioning available, it was a premium, business only, paid feature that you had to sign up for and pay a premium to get. Is that fair to folks who would benefit greatly from being able to participate in a meeting now that they could actually read captions, like live captioning while a meeting's happening, for them to have to pay extra or have to have the host, subscribe to this higher level of service to be able to have automate closed captioning? So I think they kind of got, this is another great, I think, example of peer pressure in the accessibility area, is that folks basically pushed and said, no, this really should be table stakes for doing a video conferencing platform. If you're going to offer automatic closed captioning, that should be in the base feature set that everyone gets. So I include this link in here because Zoom, and this is as of February of this year, has enabled that automatic closed captioning for all their meetings. So they have the transcription service, but this is also part of the paid feature. I think what they're making available to everyone is the automatic closed captions. So you don't get the transcription necessarily for free, but while the meeting is going on, you get a live transcript or a live closed captioning happening while it's in process. So I don't know, what did you all think of Zoom making that move? Do you feel like they were pressured into it? I think they were. So I'll look to my other panelists here.
I think so. I mean, it's something that it's often tough for me to deal with mentally, is that the fact that a lot of people approach accessibility as like an elective thing,
right?
Where it really should be an accessibility first way that you're developing stuff. So yeah, to have it as a premium feature, and then realizing that when everyone had to work from home and this may be the only option that people had, they had to give, because it was either that or they would probably lose their service. Because I believe Google also has live captioning for meetings as well. And if you're not at the forefront of competition, you're going to be at the very back very quickly.
Well, and I think Google kind of set the standard here though with YouTube. YouTube started implementing this auto captioning on all the content, which I think kicked off a really great trend. Is that you've got folks who are now going through and captioning images on Twitter, making sure that like even your tweets are accessible and have appropriate messaging to describe what is in an image necessarily. So I think that Google kicked that off. I feel like Google kicked it off. Maybe someone can correct me and say there was a prior precedent of a larger group doing that.
And that's definitely where I noticed it first and I read a lot of subtitles because it's just easy if the room is loud or noisy or people are talking around you and you just need a singular focus. Subtitles can be really great. And I mean, even going beyond that, sometimes if you have ADHD and you just need that extra visual stimulus, so you have the sound plus the visual, that can help you focus.
Right.
So
again, more accessibility.
exactly.
I have a 13-year-old son, and everything he watches is with captions. He's
Mm.
not deaf. He has no problem hearing, but he prefers to read the captioning, just like you said, because it provides a focus. And it's a perfectly quiet room. I'm like, I'm what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm on the he's watching like the Avengers on his iPad, but with reading the captions. So I find it interesting because it appeals to everyone. Has different learning modes too.
Mhm.
Some people may want to read, some people may have like more of an auditory like learning kind of mechanism. And so I think it's great that we can actually take this AI technology and put it to this greater good of exposing content to others, which gets to um, that comment about multi-language. If we can now start translating that into multiple languages, I think there was something released recently about that as well, where they're talking about live translating meetings in some platform. I have to go find it. Maybe Kim saw it.
I don't recall seeing that specifically, but I am also thinking about the Plone conference in 2013, which was held in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at the time, it was a combination of Plone conference and the Python conference in Brazil. And it was like 400 and some people. And the main language for the Plone part of the conference was English, but a huge number of talks were in Portuguese. And so I was thinking, well, even though they were going to have live interpreters, I remember thinking that if we could just read the captions, it would be that much easier for people to absorb and participate and interact. So this ability for us to get live captioning automatically and eventually the ability to get the live translation also automatically, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I see it as a big boon for accessibility and getting content to folks. All right, topic number 2. Annette, you've got this one. You want to present to us on Pally?
Yes, let me share my screen.
Oh, so PW is Plone, Plone. That is a open source community that has brought a lot of us together who are on this call.
Here we go. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I wanted to bring up Pally, and Pally is one of many accessibility tools for the web. But what I thought was really special about Pally in particular was that it comes in a couple of flavors and that you can use it for a variety of different ways that can be really useful. So going down the page, Pally itself is a command line tool. And it'll load up the web pages and it outputs your content or the results of that search in different formats. So like it can put it out in JSON, a CSV, a TSV, and then there's also reporters that they make. And so you can like export it to an HTML file, or you can write your own reporter if you need to format it a specific way. But then on top of that, there's the Pally dashboard. And the Pally dashboard actually gives you, it's like a web service. So the dashboard and the web service work together, but then you can set that to automate and automatically update your pages like daily or such. And then you have a panel that you can actually look at. And let me see if they have so you can add a URL and it will give you a nice panel summary of what's happening. And it actually keeps historic data. So you can have historic data, you can have reports you can navigate for. So I believe it runs on MongoDB right now, but they're actually working on another version of this called Sidekick that's supposed to use Postgres. And then the last option, which is the one I really love, is Pally CI. It's also command line, but the Pally CI takes everything from before and like really gives it the power. So it's a command line that's meant to be used with continuous integrations. So it actually will return an exit code, which I learned the hard way and killed a couple of our pipelines trying to deploy things and testing. But say if you say, okay, there's a threshold and I only want to allow 4 warnings to go through, it'll actually stop your integration right there. So you can use it in that fashion. But then you can also tell it to do certain pages. You can give it a XML of a sitemap and it will traverse through the sitemap. And you can actually give it actions. So you can write it a action script, and there's 2 languages, so it's got lots of options. But there's a nice way, and let me search this page to get down there. Actions, okay. Let me scroll down there. There's a nice way to write actions in almost plain language, which is somewhere on this page, but you could write it and say, visit this page, wait 2 seconds, click on this option. And it's really great because a lot of the tools that do automated reporting don't work if you have to log into a website. But with the actions, I was actually able to tell it, as long as your markup has landmarks or ID tags, to say, find the username field, enter this text, find the password field, enter this text. Wait until you see object on page. So I picked an object way at the bottom of the page, waited for that page to load. And then from there, whoops, let me see if I have an example here. Sorry, you're getting my messed up screen.
Is there a way to integrate that with your like existing integration tests? Because like you're already
I think you're cutting out on us a bit.
that. Is there a way to do this accessibility stuff? Because a lot of places have integration tests, right, that are already going through the login flows and stuff like that, rather than maintain like 2 code bases for accessibility and your integration. Is there a way you can put those together? You know?
I believe you can just integrate this into whatever set of tests that you have running already.
Okay.
And
The
there's
command
some
line, right?
examples in here. Yeah, it's command line. And it's promise based too. So you can run it async. It runs with a wait. So if you read through the documentation of the Pally CI in particular, you can just integrate it right into your test package.
Okay, so I was going to ask how this works with something like React, where it's a pretty rich like, application and not a web page.
Actually, the first time I wrote an example with this was for a React website. Funny enough, it was for Landswarm. And
oh, tell me
yeah,
more.
it worked really neat. Let me see if I can pull up an example here. This is maybe not the best example, but it's a good start on kind of showing you how you can use some of the Pally test.
Well, the best part about being able to run it in a CI pipeline is now you can have a wall of shame and put those, failed tests right up in front of everybody and force, kind of.
I'm not going to do that to myself.
Peer pressure people into fixing their accessibility issues.
Let me see. I'm going to reshare a different window here.
I believe in private grief, Calvin.
All right. Is that window working?
Yeah, we see your VS Code.
Great. Okay. So these are just some of the commands that I keep in case. But here's an example. And I was able to, this is my, you make a Pally CI JSON and you can tell your command here when you're going into it, take this config. So I'm saying, run this command from this place, take this config, spit it out into JSON, and then I'm converting it into my reporter and saving it in the folder. Oh gosh, I just closed it. This is the joy of live demos, isn't it?
Yeah, nothing like it.
Here we go. So here I can tell it, okay, I want WCAG standard 2.0 AAA. I want the level of error in my reports back, my timeout, my wait time. And then here, this is actually just the example. This is pally.org. You can actually tell this to take screenshots and what size viewport. So if you have a mobile site or you need different sizes, you can tell it what sizes to go. And then this is an example of wait for element site brand to be visible. So it's going to look for the CSS class. And once that's visible, it will take a screenshot of that page and save it to this output location. Then it's going to click on the site nav button, and then it's going to screenshot the next page. And while this is happening, it's also going to generate your accessibility report. So you'll have screenshots of going through the pages, it'll save it, and then you'll actually have your report on top of that.
That's awesome. So you could use those screenshots to keep your documentation up to date. So as you run, you know, new revs of the code or new features are being deployed, they can actually be generating the docs to be given to your users.
Yes. So that's like a great example of how you can use that to walk through an example of what you're working with. And that is just like kind of a basic example, but you can tell it to do a lot more stuff. So if you have like a React page, especially where you need to click on an item and load another page and see, did this load? Is this item on the page? Did this box show up? You can tell it to check for all of those things. And then, like I said, take screenshots along the way and save them into folders.
That's very cool.
Yes.
Neat. All right. Next up, Kim, you've got your next topic, which is a personal story.
Yeah, when I was working at the university here in Oshkosh, in Wisconsin, there was a colleague of mine, of a very good colleague who had a vision problem that got worse and worse over the years. And I remember watching him read websites, anything on his computer. And as you know, everything we do nowadays is on the computer. And I remember being amazed at how large the fonts were that he had to zoom into to be able to read anything. So a sentence that would catch at a glance, because of the size of the font that we're used to using, he would have to scan it, like one maybe 3 or 4 letters appearing on the screen at a time. And so I remember being really struck by all the things that we take for granted being able to see well. So yeah, so that's really the story. And unfortunately for him, he's since lost his eyesight completely. So this is around us. So that really was the story. And I know it's not a terribly uplifting story, but it's one of the things that I think we all like to think we're empathetic, and we wouldn't want to be in that person's shoes, or if we were, we'd like people to do the right thing and make their website, make our websites and applications usable by people of all sorts, regardless of physical handicaps they might have.
But I think you found a tool that can help with this.
Yes, and so a few years ago, one of our close friends in the Plone community, Paul Rowland, had mentioned a tool called Axe, which is open source. So Axe Core is the tool that is open source, and I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you can see this. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, we see your screen.
So Axe Core is available for anybody to use. I don't even know how to pronounce the name of the organization that puts this out, but Axe Core is a set of JavaScript that you can use. You can build all sorts of cool functionality, including accessibility compliance checking live on a site as you're developing a site or as you're editing a site. And so there was a company I used to work for where we built a very simple accessibility compliance checking tool right into the software, so that as somebody was editing a page and they were about to publish it, before they could publish it, one of the things that the tool would do was to run this accessibility compliance check and tell you right away if you were about to publish something that was missing alt text and missing text in links and so on. So you could fix that problem before the page went live. And so that's open source. And so in addition to this open source tool that the company makes available, you can actually use a commercial solution that they provide. And the plans are not very expensive. You get the ability to run extracts of certain reports and save your reports. And so you can look at the state of your website, for example, over time. And so I want to show you what one of those reports looks like.
While you're pulling that up, PW had a quick question about, are there Python versions of these tools? And I think at least for me, the answer is, I don't think it matters if there's Python versions of the tools. I think it's a matter that we use these tools against our Python code. So if we're generating views or generating sites and generating pages, that we still exercise and use these tools against our Python world to make sure our software is accessible. I don't know if anyone else has a different opinion on that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, here, these tools are there to make what we produce usable by more people. And so maybe I'm not a purist about Python. I love Python, but I'm not going to say everything I use must be Python. I think this is a way for us to deliver really good Python-based software and apps and websites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from looking around, most of the tools I noticed were JavaScript, and that's probably because they have to be able to dynamically go through the DOM and interact with it.
Mm-hmm.
What I did see is there are some Python integrations. Like there's a Python Axe Selenium integration, so that if you want to integrate the runner into your code, that's how you would do it. And that's the biggest thing. Like Axe and HTML code sniffer are runners, and it's how you use those runners in your code, and those integrations are usually based on the package language you're working in.
Yeah, that was a great question, PW.
So let me show you.
Show us the demo.
All right, I'm gonna pick. This is a little unfair, but maybe not, because this is the software that's used to power so much of the internet, as I'm told. So here I've installed the Axe browser plugin for Chrome, and it's available in other browsers too. And I decided to just run it on WordPress.com, and you can see here that the report shows me a number of issues of different levels. Here, total of 174. But I think as any of you who've actually used one of these tools, I hope you have tried, will see that even though you might think as a coder, it's possible to get to 0 errors, a lot of accessibility is interpreted. So some of the things might be less severe. Some of the things that you consider critical, you probably should fix. And so this particular example of a site has 7 critical issues really around area roles. And so the screen readers that you'd want to use on, or that somebody would need to use on this site, might be fooled by some of these, or might not be able to understand what's being presented visually. So some of these issues would be things that you probably want to fix. And so this is a little small. Let me see if I can expand this out a little bit.
Yeah, I love that these tools work in context, like right around what you're looking at. Actually, Scott has a quick question on for like Axe or Pally and other tools. Is there a standard scope of accessibility that is included? He kind of went down a rabbit hole with some of his teams that, you know, you can, if you're truly like pedantic about these things, you can spend forever, like, you know, evaluating and trying to fix accessibility issues. Or can you scope a tool to say, I want to make sure I'm WCAG 2.0 AAA, or, you know, Plone in this case, I think it's only still WCAG 1.0. You know, are we saying that's good enough?
2.1.
Well, then you bet. I'm going to show in my next segment. I'll show you something, Kim, that you're going to want to go fix.
All right. Well, let me just
just show.
Well, actually, I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I think the standards, you can run checkers. There are different checkers that will actually let you run according to a standard. I think these ones are probably updated to default to the latest, highest standard.
I can tell you Pally, I believe right now runs WCAG AA, WCAG AAA 2.0. I'm not sure if they're up to 2.1 quite yet. I don't know about Axe Core. I thought Axe Core was one of the ones that did support up to 2.1. I believe W3C is the body that's developing the WCAG standards.
I believe this answers your question.
Pally also, and quite a few of these will also have Section 508, and Section 508 tends to be the federal government in the United States standard of accessibility, and they have a slightly different set of rules. I can also tell you with Pally in particular, and one of the reasons I like it so much is you can actually ignore specific rule sets in Pally. And you might be able to include too. So if there's a specific rules, you can look up in the wcag list that you don't want it to scan for, you can actually set that on an exclude list.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. All right. Well, so in this case, I just want to compare WordPress and clone.org. As you can see over here, we only have 9 issues on clone.org. That makes sense. I would have been really upset if we hadn't done much better. So in here, you can actually see the details of the particular issue that you might want to fix. Sorry, where'd I go?
Wow, Kim, only 9 issues. This is great. Clone's amazing.
Imagine that. So let's see. Yeah, so color contrast is one that is challenging to catch because those of us who can see perfectly well, we realize, oh, I can read all this, it's fine. But color contrast is an important issue. I remember when we were launching this site in 2016, one of our theming experts looked at the contrast and ran some accessibility compliance checks and said, we can't go live with these themes. The colors are just not good enough. So it's an important issue.
Especially since we live in a day and age where folks really love, dark themes and low contrast and like solarized, especially as developers. I guess that made us part of the issue. Developers love these low contrast coding environments because it's easy on the eyes to code, but it's not accessible for folks to consume.
And the color contrast issue in here is actually in this message at the bottom of the page that asks you to be aware of the cookies that are being presented to you. And I was like, oh man, the irony, because I turned that feature on. All right, so obviously I should pinch myself for doing that.
Thanks, Kim. All right, very cool. Moving right along. So I have another tool similar to the ones that were just kind of shown. Let me share my screen real quick. Here we go. So FAE, or FAE, is the Functional Accessibility Evaluator. Similar to some of their tools, this one will crawl your site and look for specific issues related to the standards, like especially the WCAG and WCAG 2.0. So for those of you who aren't familiar with those specific standards, they are W3C standards, as opposed to the Section 8, which was mentioned earlier, which is a federal standard. But if you want to look it up, there's a W3C page. There's a nice Wikipedia page. Kind of goes over what the difference between the various standards are as far as WCAG goes. And this is where I was going to bring this up, Kim. Is like we are only mentioning on the plone.org site that we are WCAG version 1.0. So for 2.0, we really should update that and make sure we are tooting our own horn that we are accessible to the latest standards. So I wanted to bring that to your attention.
I will file a ticket.
You'll file an attention. Good. So to use this tool, you go into you basically have to sign up. They used to have a free mode where you could evaluate one page, but now you have to create an account. It's done through the University of Illinois. And so I've gone through and done a couple demo reports here. So if you can actually see, I did 6 feet up whitehouse.gov and plone.org. So it gives you based on, and this is interesting because I really have always felt that like the structure of the pages was super important. And that's one of the big things that comes in with the WCAG like standards for accessibility is, I don't know, I felt like we had this great markup language for describing a document, but so many people abused it for styling a page. And those two things never met. Well, at least back in the day. I feel like we're getting better now. So this tool helps you identify all those various kinds of rule groups from the WCAG standard, and not all of them can be done automatically. So you can see there's some manual checks that need to be done as according to this tool, but you can see some kind of low-hanging fruit violations and some warnings and understand where you need to go in and fix some things up. So the 6 feet up site has 10 violations, not including any manual checks. If I went back to and I just did one page for 6 feet up, but for plone.org, I went a little deeper. You can see whitehouse.gov, 3 violations, which could be, you have to kind of go evaluate each of these things as well in context to make sure that there are genuinely violations, but folks can spend an eternity trying to solve some of them. Kind of speaks to Scott's point about going down the rabbit hole of trying to solve all the possible accessibility issues with your site. But these are obviously really great and quick and easy tools. I just did these right before we started. Like I literally went to the site, signed up, ran a quick query, and I'll show you the plone.org one, which I ran more than one thing. It ran 10 pages. And plone.org obviously scores really highly, or I guess slowly, when it comes to the number of issues. Because I think and this is one of the reasons I've really been attracted to the Plone community is because they do care. Like Kim just mentioned in the previous article, they weren't going to launch the plone.org site because there were accessibility issues. It wasn't like there was a bug in the code that was keeping the thing from functioning. There was a bug in the usability of the site for others to access the content. And I think that the focus, like your intent, your community, where everyone is kind of like what they feel is important, shines through when it comes to accessibility. If you care enough about accessibility, you're going to hold up a release to make sure that it's right before you go live. And so I think Plone's done a really good job with that. And I love the fact that we've always kind of touted our Section 508, our WCAG compatibilities. And so that's one of the things I wanted to kind of call out. This is a great tool. Now, keep in mind, if you use this tool, all of the links are public. So if someone has one of these links, they don't have to be logged in necessarily to see them. You just have to be logged in to initiate one of the reports. So the CSV reports and this report I'm showing you here, if I shared this link, anyone can get to it. You do not have to be authenticated. You can't protect a report necessarily from someone else. Although if you're kind of just living in the world that is reality, you understand that these pages are all public anyway, and anyone can run these reports against your site. So it's a good idea for you to run them first and attack these issues as you see them. So that's the FAA tool. Again, it's mostly around the functional like content, like so understanding of the content. Really good, easy, quick, and easy to use. That's one thing I wanted to kind of bring to people's attention. All right, moving right along. Next topic is going to be Annette. You've got the
Hey.
WAI.
Yes. So I will share my screen.
Yeah, let me stop sharing.
And actually, a quick segue before I get into it, because when Kim was talking about the color contrast, I want to show you a neat tool. So if you go into Chrome, and I believe Firefox might have this too, if you find an item, so I highlighted this, and this is the color here, and I click on that color, there's a little contrast ratio section here.
Huh.
And
I've
if you
never seen
click
that
on
before.
that, it will show you the range at which your color will pass and the range at which it'll fail. So I know that as long as I'm in this area, I'll pass. And then if I get out of this area, I will fail. So just a real quick, easy way to say, okay, this is pass, this is kind of okay, and this is fail. And I use that all the time to just quickly correct my colors when I'm building sites.
That is really cool. I never noticed I was there.
Is that feature new? Because when I was trying to do color contrast like this past December, I didn't see that.
I think it might have been in there a year or so. I've been using it for a while now.
Okay.
But it's kind of hard to find.
It's true that a couple of months is like, a dog's lifetime in the web.
It really is.
Yeah, what was that feature called? That was just asked for in the chat.
Oh, it's just a color contrast
right?
ratio. Yeah. So if I go into inspector and then you find the color and you click on it, there's this contrast ratio section.
Nice.
And it'll give you a check for whether it's a 3.0 or like it tells you what the standard ratio is and what your ratio is versus what you would expect for that level.
Yeah, so. Jake, I had no idea it was there either.
Yeah, me either. Nope. I guaranteed you would get your money's worth today, and you have right there.
It was like my drive-by tip right there. But anyways, moving into what my actual area was, it was just, I found this section of this website and I thought it was so crucial because I feel so many times with accessibility checking, especially if you're doing it after you've deployed your product and then you get hit by QA or it goes out and then you get a problem or you get a lawsuit, it feels a little different when you have to go in and remediate because you're fixing things. You're just trying to check the boxes sometimes just to get it out the door. And I try not to think about that because that's thinking problem first, but it's not thinking people first. And whenever I'm developing a website, I always try and think people first or user first. And even in my language, I try to use people first language instead of saying a blind user, a user who's blind, a user who has trouble seeing. And think about it, they're all the same people. It's just we all have a different diversity of abilities, and we all have different barriers to navigating anything or anything you approach in the world. And I really wanted to find a page that would really help explain that. And the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative has a great section in how people with disabilities use the web. And that's because the range of disabilities, it's so much wider than you could ever imagine. And all we can try to do is start to think in the mindset of building something that has a great foundation that's going to be flexible and usable. But it's hard to do that if you don't have an example. And I think one of the best things about that I've learned as an example of how to illustrate that is a lot of times when we think about accessibility, a lot of these accessibility checkers are going to focus on people who are blind, who have difficulty seeing, colorblind, grayscale, they might have spots in their eye. So we all, a lot of times pick on contrast, focus, colors, but then it gets really easy to ignore keyboard accessibility. Can you tab through a page? Can you get to a menu? We ignore motor accessibility. Can this person swipe left or right on a cell phone? Can they turn it to the side to see the entire width of the page if the content doesn't fit in their viewport? And so this section has a really neat section called Stories of Web Users. And they're not true stories, they're just scenarios, but it's examples of different types of challenges and barriers and just ways to think, okay, this is how somebody would have to approach this. So example, a retiree with low vision and a hand tremor and mild short-term memory loss is going to have a different set of accommodations that they will need to be able to access your website better. And so I'm not going to go through these per se, but if you ever have a chance, definitely read through some of these stories and just try and put yourself in the mindset. And hopefully from a foundation level, you can start building up blocks that are going to reach a wider set of audience. This page also had a nice section called Diverse Abilities and Barriers. And this is an incredibly detailed section. It actually breaks it down. So like auditory, cognitive learning, and neurological, physical, and you can go drill down into it and actually get some of the examples like ergonomic and specially designed keyboard use and mouse. One type of aid that sometimes is around there for a keyboard is if you don't have limbs or you can't use your fingers or you can't type individually, some people have a mouth stick. It's a mouth guard with a stick, and they'll lean into the keyboard and type one by one what they need to do. So they're going to have a different use case. Being able to hold like Control Alt Delete or controls, that's not going to work when you have a single stick in your mouth. So how do you make it so that the foundational parts of your website can be accessed by a user like that? And it wasn't something I even thought about until I started reading through specific stories. And I'm like, I never thought about how to accommodate someone like that.
Mm-hmm. This is great. This is amazing.
Yeah. So this is
I mean,
really detailed. And then the last section is tools and techniques. So this kind of puts together everything from the first two sections into one page. So you can almost scroll through this page and get most of it, where it tells you about perception. It tells you about different features. And I love saying accessibility features, because it's things that you're adding to make it more accessible, but it gives specific examples of these cases. And then it gives you some of the examples of assistive technologies that someone with this barrier might use. And then there's even the stories from the first page. So it's really comprehensive. You can really get yourself in the mindset about accessibility, and you can start thinking in that mindset and start, once again, developing your foundation and using approaches from the beginning. And that'll always make it easier, because if it's there in the beginning and it becomes a habit, you no longer have to think about going back and remediating, and it's not a task or a chore.
Yeah, what a great way to gain a little bit of empathy for others on the web. I mean, we don't think about those things. Like I would never seen these tools or this set of documents. This is incredible. I'm ready to like code for all now, because I can now visualize and understand and like read through those problems. I mean, it was, as a person who's like, not disabled, I definitely am consider myself like a power user, and I get so upset when I can't like keyboard navigate a page. I gotta reach for a mouse like a savage. This is crazy. But now I'm like, now I understand like how people can start building up better use cases or better like user stories and test cases for those kinds of things.
Right.
That's great.
I have a learning disability, and it makes it hard to read sometimes. Like I try to read things on Slack, which is a thing I have to do every day, but Slack doesn't have any like TTYL accessibility stuff. So sometimes when my boss sends me a long paragraph, I can't read it.
Man, it's terrible.
Yeah.
That's really surprising that Slack hasn't figured that out.
Yeah.
It seemed like there'd be a quick action you could add, like read this to me.
Yeah. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that's the way to get their attention, right?
Yeah.
It's strong worded encouragement.
Grounded financially.
I don't know. It just seems like if you follow these best practices, if we can build better software, like everyone wins. Like I mean, it takes more time. So there's a cost, but it just feels like more folks maybe they weren't neglecting to do it because of the cost. They were neglecting to do it because they didn't think to do it.
Yeah, and it can be challenging because if you're on a tight timeline and you're thinking, I'm just trying to get these requirements through, I'll just handle these now and I'll come back for it. It's can be really tough to pitch later on. Okay, now it's time to come back for it.
Right.
So a lot of the times, like when I'm working and I know in our office, I've done this before where I'm just like, these colors aren't going to work. I'm going to need a new palette, guys, or this text isn't going to work, or this icon's not going to work. For anyone who's been on the receiving end of that, I don't apologize because that's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing as a developer. I'm calling to call it out right as I see it.
Right. But it's been the same discussion around security. Like we'll bolt on security later. We'll add HTTPS or we'll do some measures later. And now I don't think folks think that way. I feel like new applications or greenfield applications, folks are probably thinking security mindset first too, when it comes to like developing the app. This is the next step. This should be the next natural. This is table stakes. This has to be there. The world is not full of people who look like and act like me. How do I know what that looks like? Great resource. It was awesome.
It's like when we deliver software, we expect there to be documentation. We expect there to be unit tests, right? Why wouldn't we expect there to be accessibility compliance checks?
Yeah, exactly.
And with the tools that we have here, I mean, it's pretty painless to know what you're doing that needs some fixing.
I mean, at bare minimum, they're going to give you a great like low-hanging fruit checklist or the manual list of things you should be going and checking. So now you're aware. Like you have no excuse now because the tool has told you go look here, even if it's a manual test and it can't be checked in an automated fashion, which certainly that's coming. If you apply some machine learning and some categorization, like all those kinds of things, we probably can start getting more context to the machines who are doing the testing to give us better results.
May I share?
You may. Yeah, Kim, you're up next. The last topic, folks.
All right, let me share. I wanted to share this great blog post written by an accessibility compliance expert and friend in the Plum community, Rob Porter. And this is a list of 10 things that are probably the most common errors you're going to make in your websites or your web applications. And this is what I consider to be basic reading, basic awareness for any developer, any project manager, any product manager should know these things. And so they're not hard. As we talked about, color contrast would be the first one, right? And text descriptions in links, or as you know, in images, those are very, very common. They're the top ones. And so there's captioning, as we've been talking about, not just for live captioning, but just regular captioning for videos too. And some maybe obviously less visible ones for those of us who are sighted, the ability for someone to know the structure of the HTML that's being presented depends on the headings being in order. So H1, then an H2 inside, and then H3 inside, but not skipping or not using the H tags just to do visual formatting for aesthetic purposes, but these have real meaning. These are semantically important.
And you should have one H1.
And as we've been talking about, keyboard only access, that is really a thing that irks me when I can't tab to all the controls on a page, because I hate having to reach for a mouse or touchpad. I just want to use tab and then space or enter. And so when Calvin talks in all caps and we can tell, Calvin, did you read that blog post?
I don't talk in all caps. That's not my thing. I swear.
So that was a blog post I wanted to share with you. And
Yeah, that's a good post. That kind of leads into like the last section here. But go ahead, Gemma. You got some more things you wanted to talk about there.
Yeah. And so we've been talking about essentially free or very low cost services or tools that we can use to check accessibility compliance. I did also want to mention a service that is paid. And I used to use this at a previous company where we built websites for government agencies. And this is a tool that we used. It's a paid tool. It provides really comprehensive accessibility analyses of your site, and it scans your site, scans all the pages you want it to scan, or maybe the entire page, the entire site, and it'll give you a report as frequently as you need, usually once a week, and you can see for yourself how your site is doing in terms of all sorts of measures, including accessibility. So the accessibility compliance checker is also a tool that you can put into your browser from this company. And so I wanted to show you what that looks like. Again, I'm going to pick on Plone. Let me see here. Where'd it go? That wasn't it. Here we go.
It's like triple check now.
So here's, yeah, so you can see, same idea. You can filter the errors that come back to you. So you can see specific things if you want to narrow them down. But it's the same idea that you can focus on the errors that you feel are the most important to solve, to address. And it's something that you can do live through just viewing a page. So Site Improve is a tool that, as I said, is something that we've used for bigger web properties, something that site editors can use. They can consume this report. It's not really necessary to be a developer to understand the output of this kind of report, but it's a way to maintain the quality of the content that you're serving to your users.
That's a good point. It's not just the developers of the software. The content creators themselves have to be aware that the content that they are putting into these sites have to be accessible too. They have to make sure that they're describing images and providing appropriate headers. And so having a tool that they can use in line is super handy, because a lot of them are not software developers. They don't think about these kinds of topics. They're just content creators, or they're producing the content, but they can't produce it in a vacuum.
I like to think of a website as, when we deliver it, or a web application, we deliver it, we want to deliver top-notch quality. We want to make sure it's inclusive. And so we deliver it at a certain level of quality, and we want it to stay there. We don't want to see editors to come in and upload images. And then even if you've got a field in your image uploader that says you must put in a title for this, some people will just type in image or photo. I'm sorry, but that's not very descriptive. That doesn't tell anybody what's going on. So you can try to enforce things with technology, but if you don't have the awareness in the content creators or the content editors, or sometimes in the person responsible for making adjustments to the theme of your site, where you can, as we've seen, change the color contrast to make it hard for someone to read, you have to raise that awareness in your users, in your editors, in your designers. And that's really how you can avoid that kind of downward drift in the quality of the product or the tool that you've produced.
So David has an interesting question about reading difficulty. And is it still an issue? Does it impair accessibility to use uncommon words or complex sentence structures? I would think it does still. I mean, I don't know if the world hasn't changed and we've all become, superhuman thinkers. So I don't know. I mean, David, feel free to unmute and kind of maybe dive a little
Yeah,
deeper there.
actually, it struck me that as we were talking, and I think it's Josh on this conference was talking about his reading difficulty. There are many flavors of reading difficulty, but one that many people sadly have is that they don't read, and because they don't read, they don't have very large vocabularies. It's very well known that so-called intelligence tests are often simply tests of how much reading you do. If you do a lot of reading, you have a bigger vocabulary of words that mean things to you, and you recognize more words as being real words. So more reading translates to a higher score, but less reading and more dependence on heard words as opposed to read words may mean that when you see a word on a web page that you don't ever hear in conversation, that word is meaningless to you.
Yeah, no, I think people need to be aware. Actually, there was a great, what's his name? Seth, the marketing guy.
Oh yeah, Godin.
Seth Godin had a great post this week about jargon versus lingo, and that jargon is words that are exclusionary, and that lingo can bring a community together.
I often use the text to speech. If I word I can't read personally by myself or sound out, I'll use that text to speech to get me to the point where I can hear it or understand it. But I've also in high school, like I failed an exam because I couldn't understand what the word was, couldn't sound it out, and the teacher wouldn't help me know what that. So I had to take an F on that exam for that.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this age of like kind of distance learning, or we're at home with our kids and they're learning in our house, but they hear words or they read words. They don't have a teacher who's saying them to them. They've never heard the word, so it's kind of up to them now to figure out how that's pronounced. And so we live in a bilingual family, so they have two attempts to try and pronounce a word and get it right. And sometimes it's funny because they get it wrong, or they get it wrong in the context of like English, but they pronounce it with a French pronunciation, and I giggle internally because I don't want to do that externally. But then I'll be like, no, it's pronounced here this way, because they've only ever seen the letters put together, and they only know the knowledge like in their head that they've ever heard, but they've read a lot of words. So I could see that for sure.
We have a family giggle at one of my kids who had read the word, and I'll spell it, EPITOME.
That's exactly the one I got hung up on too.
Yes. And had read the word many times, had a concept of what it means, and had no problem with it, but had never heard it pronounced. So naturally didn't pronounce it in any way as a phonetics person would attempt to pronounce it.
Yeah.
My story on that word is still traumatic. 30 years later, I still remember the girlfriend at the time making fun of me because I pronounced it wrong.
Well, that just proves that you're a reader. That's all that really says.
Yeah.
I've forgotten how many times that I hear a word said in conversation, and I was really happy I heard it before I said it, because you're like, oh, whoa, what?
Well, like even with English, it can be tough because I come from a Caribbean family, and so I had to learn, and they were taught too in school, unaccented American English. But every once in a while, I get all of my friends around me when there's like, if I've been with my family for like a week and like go see one of my friends, like we don't say vegetable, we say vegetable, we say comfortable. I said cinnamon, and they put me in speech classes for some of my accenting when I was younger, because in an American school system, that wasn't how you said it. And but my
13-year-old who does a lot of reading will do the same thing at the dinner table. I'm like, what word did you just say? Like, he's grown up in America with pretty much American French family, and yeah, if you've never heard it, it's so hard to like unhear weird things like that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not weird. It's just, you know what you know, and you have to just go with it, right?
Yeah, I think one of the having like a Kindle book and the Audible book together is a great,
Yeah, that is
yeah,
nice.
the combined where you can read through and toggle back and forth. It's a good learning tool.
Has anyone had experience with the readers of text, like a text in a book that doesn't have an audio track? So you're now having a computer synthesis of speech read you a book, and the computer synthesis comes to a word that it tries to pronounce and pronounces in a very straightforward way, but it's clearly not as any human or person who's ever used or heard the word would speak it. For example, Calvin's last name, I'd be curious to know how the speech reader would handle it.
And it's not just the word pronunciation, but the cadence is always awful.
Yeah.
I want to share.
I use Google AI speech, text to speech narration to read some of my books. So PDF books, that is. This is a very, very good job. You can select any sort of accent, but it's free. But every time I run it, you have to acknowledge, the services that Google is providing for free.
Yeah.
I wanted to go ahead.
I was just going to comment. So there are people who actually make a profession out of deciding how understandable the words and sentence structures you choose for documents are. So certain governmental documents, for example, are constrained by law to have a particular readability, as the word goes. And there are words that they will flag or point out that, a significant number of people won't understand or at least won't properly understand this word. In the clinical trial space, we have to create things called informed consent documents. And these things are things that people need to understand in order to be able to read and sign. So naturally, if we use a bunch of medical terms, or bioscience terms, then there are going to be people who just sort of look at that and say, I have no idea what I'm signing.
And we've run into that with our documentation. We've actually kind of had to fire some of the text from doing documentation and keep them programming because they get too the verbiage tries to be some kind of novel rather than just simple and to the point. And when you have people speaking Portuguese, Spanish, Chinese, all these different, it's hard for them to read English to begin with. But when you have this flowery language rather than a pure documentation of something, it's almost impossible. And as you simplify it down, I think Google's always really good about this, at distilling it down to the smallest. It's like good code, right? You get it down to the smallest you can get it and make it easily understandable.
There's a famous line, probably misattributed to Winston Churchill, but he said, this is the sort of English with which I will not put. Up with which I will not put. I didn't say it right. Up with which I will not put. So, there are changes constantly in the English language. It's a fluid thing, and I always love that public radio thing, Away with Words.
Yes.
Wayward Words. A great show. Anyway, but they talk about it all the time, at how language is not a static thing, but the bottom line is that you can try to write it in a way that everyone will understand it. It's going to confuse some people.
I wanted to share this website, this tool, because it's one that I introduced to some marketing students that I'm helping with for a robotics team in town. And in trying to show them how to write news items and blog posts, I thought this tool would be very nice for them to understand how important readability is and how to maybe avoid the passive form of phrases and simplify their writing to be more direct and easier for someone to consume. So this level of readability is exactly what I was thinking of when we were talking about this. How difficult is it to understand what's written here? And this tool is very nice because as you type, let me see if I can type in. Actually, that phrase seems to have gone through fine, but it can update your
Write worse,
readability.
Kim. Write worse, man.
Say something in Canadian.
Sorry. I use Grammarly a lot for similar to that, but this
Right.
makes me think of early Word, Microsoft Word, because I remember you do the analysis and it would
all
have the
the
readability
squigglies.
level. I always forgot about that.
Well, Kim and Annette, I want to thank you for being willing participants in our accessibility panel for the May 2021 edition of IndyPy. It's been really fun talking about this. Actually, hopefully it's been eye-opening for folks who've been on the call and understanding all the challenges that exist when writing good software and actually having it consumed by other humans on this planet who may not look like or sound like or be like you. So I hope folks really enjoyed that.